It's my pleasure today on Physio+10 to welcome Dr Alison Grimaldi. Alison, thanks so much for joining us. I just wanted to start up by asking you, how was it that you became involved in physiotherapy?
First, thanks very much for the invitation, Doug. It's great to be here today. My interest in physio, I think actually it's really interesting. I'm going through this period at the moment with my kids. So we've got one at university and then another two are just reaching that point of, leaving school. And it's really hard, isn't it, when you're sort of leaving school to know exactly what you want to do. I was fortunate to have a couple of opportunities to do work experience. I was keen to do something in the medical field, something helping people, I suppose, but I wasn't much of a blood lover at school. And so I didn't want to do medicine. And so in senior, I actually did a work experience at a rural hospital because I lived out near Kingaroy. So I did a placement there for work experience, and I just loved it. I thought it was really great, and it was a nice exposure because there was a combination of outpatients and then lots of different sort of ward work. So it gave me quite a good introduction to what physio is. And I thought, yeah, I think this is for me. And so that was that. I put that down on my preferences and got that. So that was the beginning.
So like in your family, did you have a member that was in the health profession, or were you the first one to enter that field?
No close relatives, really. So I'm from a farming background. So my parents have been in farming, and their parents were, had some farming and some in industry, in clothing manufacturing. So not really in my direct family. Some of my cousins, a couple of my cousins did medicine. But they weren't really sort of close contact. So I wouldn't say that was much of an influence on me. So I guess within my close family, yes, I was probably the first one in that, medical or paramedical field.
Yeah. And where do you fall in the family, like sibling wise?
So I'm in the middle. I'm a middle child of three.
And the eldest and the youngest, they also went to university, or were you the first?
So, my older brother did an apprenticeship. So he went into building. He's not doing that now, but he's sort of chief operations officer of a company, manufacturing company. And then my younger brother initially did teaching, and again, not in that now. He only did that for a few years. So nothing medical there in the siblings.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to sort of be I guess, therefore you were the first to go off to university and leave the family farm. And I'm guessing you went to Brisbane, University of Queensland.
That's right.
So how was that, leaving home and heading to the big smoke?
Well, I guess for me, because we had sort of lived, rurally, the local school opportunities weren't fantastic for us. So we actually all went to boarding school. So I'd sort of, been at boarding school since the age of 12. So I guess it wasn't, and that was in Toowoomba, not in Brisbane, but in Toowoomba. So I guess it was not a, it wasn't like I was leaving home for the first time and being, semi-independent for the first time. But I went to, UQ, and because I was coming from a rural, region, initially lived on campus at UQ at Women's, and that was fantastic. It was, a great introduction to uni, and I had a great time at Women's for a couple of years. And and UQ at that time was really the only university in Queensland that offered physio, I think. So, that was the natural option for me. I didn't want to go further than I absolutely had to. So, it was great, and I really enjoyed coming to Brisbane.
I'm guessing that after the 4 or 5 years of boarding school food and then 2 years of women's, I'm guessing that was probably also institutionalised foods. What urged you to move out of the college environment, and I guess you moved into a flat or some sort of other personal accommodation?
Yeah, so a friend and I moved into a house that her parents had bought in Brisbane. I guess, it was more just getting to the serious end of your degree, wasn't it? College life is perhaps a little too social for the serious end of your degree. So it was sort of good to, have some more space and, time to focus and study in those last couple of years of the degree.
And when did you finish up? Well, like when was your degree completed?
Yeah, so that was 1990.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got fond memories myself of finishing and then heading off to my first job. So for you, what was important about graduating? Was it the pay? Was it the status? Was it just getting rid of the books? What was it for you?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting to finish study for a while. Uh, I think, one of the great things that I think about graduating as a physiotherapist, looking at, and because I'd been to college and had other friends who'd done different degrees, it was really nice to come out and actually have a clear pathway and a clear profession. Whereas a lot of friends who'd perhaps done art or science or where there isn't that sort of clear pathway or business, so then they graduated and had to then start finding a pathway for themselves, whereas for us it was pretty nice to come out and have a degree, have a profession, and know exactly what you were going to do. Obviously from there, then there was a lot of years of finding your pathway within your pathway in terms of your special interest areas or your niche. But yeah, it was really good to sort of come out and have that degree. And the other great thing about graduating as a physio was it was a fantastic degree to travel with. And I
Yes.
feel very sorry for the young ones who, maybe have been graduating and haven't been able to do that. But a lot of my friends, in our year, a lot of people in our year, we'd work for a couple of years, earn some money and then travel. And so I traveled with friends for 3 years after my first couple of years of work, and it was such a good degree to travel with. We were highly regarded in the UK, where we did most of our work there, and it was easy to get work. It was really well paid compared to other people whose professions weren't as easily transferred to a working holiday. And so working in bars or working as a nanny, you just didn't get the same sort of pay. So for us, it was great to get that good, locum pay and then be able to travel and see the world. And it was a great opportunity then to see people working in their environments and gain some life skills, I suppose, as well.
So when you say you worked for a couple of years, I'm guessing you're saying you worked a couple of years in the hospital system and then travelled?
Yes. So my first job was in Townsville, and I loved that actually. It was one of my favourite jobs. It was a really relaxed environment, I suppose, but it was one of those hospitals where it was big enough to have a lot of different departments and a lot of exposure to different areas of the profession. And so we had a burns unit and a neonatal intensive care unit,
Okay.
and so we were a major hospital for the region, but it was still, the staff was small enough that we were a really tight-knit group, and there was lots of ease of communication with other staff, like with doctors. And so we had lots of social interactions with doctors and nurses and other people as well. And so it was really nice, multidisciplinary environment. But within our team, it was great. But because the team wasn't huge, it gave us exposure, I suppose, an opportunity to do things that maybe you wouldn't have had opportunity to do until you were a senior physio, perhaps. So yeah, I thought, it was a great exposure, and I would recommend for any new graduate to try to get that general exposure in hospital first, because what you think you're going to want to do when you graduate is not necessarily where you end up. And in that first job in Townsville, I had opportunity to do paediatrics, so developmental paediatrics and neonatal intensive care. And I loved working with kids, and I thought that was going to be my career. And I did, quite a lot of that in Townsville. And then when I first went overseas, I worked at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children. that was a bit confronting with with their massive neonatal intensive care unit with these very small preemie babies with cardiac issues. But then, while I was over there, I thought, oh, actually, I might try some adult neuro. And it was a great opportunity to do that in the UK because the UK has that BOBAS training, whereas, I had been very Carr and Shepherd trained, which really requires you to have parts of your movement and you train parts of the movement. But if you're have flaccid paralysis, it doesn't have that much to offer. So having some BOBAS experience over there was really interesting. So I did that for a while, and then I decided, no, maybe I do actually want to do musculoskeletal. And so then I started in my musculoskeletal pathway while I was over in the UK. But what I'd actually learned in pediatrics, because in those first few years, and I mean, really, that's been my life, but I did a lot of continuing education. But the experience that I'd gained in those different fields had a lot of application for musculoskeletal rehabilitation as well. So I never regret that I did, tried those different things. But, if you'd asked me, a year out, I probably wouldn't have said I was going to be a musculoskeletal physio or a sports physio. And so pathways change. So I think give yourself an opportunity to explore and get some broad experience first, because it's amazing where your pathways might take you.
What was the trigger then to move away from the neonatals and into the Musk? Like, what was that moment?
Yeah, I guess moving away from pediatrics, I loved the work, but it was very emotionally draining because it was really sad, to see, the sad stories that occur, but it wasn't just dealing with the sad things that happen to the children, but dealing with the impact on their families. Yeah. And that was one of the things I found most distressing. And so that's one of the reasons why I thought I'd try some adult neuro. And so there was, less of that, of course, sad stories and things, but things always seem sadder when they're kids that haven't had an opportunity to live their lives, I suppose. So adult neuro was really interesting, and I did enjoy that, but it was really heavy work.
Physically.
And I thought, yeah, very heavy with all the transfers and things like that, particularly with those, flaccid patients. So then I thought, well, I'm not sure if this is going to be me for long term. And so that's why I thought I'd, try the musculoskeletal again, and just loved it. And actually that, as I said, all that experience that I'd had from the neuro side of things really helped, I think, train my interest in rehabilitation and movement education and movement analysis and movement education. And so, it ended up quite a natural segue, actually.
And after that sort of traveling and I guess changing to a Musk orientation when you're in the UK, you came back to Australia. Was there a reason for that transition? You didn't meet the man of your dreams in the UK, or why'd you come back?
Oh, no, it was about visas. So I only had a working holiday visa. So I managed to extend it. So the basic visa then was 2 years. I managed to extend it for 1 year, which is the maximum extension that I could get. And so I flew out on the day my visa expired. Otherwise, I would have stayed longer. I probably would have stayed at least another year longer because I hadn't finished seeing what I wanted to finish. So that was why I came back then. I mean, I had always intended to come back, but another year might have been nice.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you hit back, came to Australia. Did you come back for a job or did you come back for study? What was the main drawback to Australia then at that stage?
So I guess it was just to continue the career, but definitely masters was already on the agenda. So we'd had a couple of our friends who'd left, the year before, the friends that I'd stayed with and I before we came back. So we'd had friends that had come back and done their masters. So, we were quite keen, the friends that I was still in the UK with, we were keen to do our masters too. So It was coming back, and I spent some time back on the family farm and doing some locums there, spent some time with my family, and yeah, then did some locum work really until waiting to get on the master's program.
And which one did you decide to do? Was it sports or Musk?
Yeah, I did sports. And yeah, I guess it was an interesting choice because most of my friends did Musk. But for me, my key interest was really in movement and movement analysis and movement training and muscle function. And so I guess that's what headed me down the sports road. So I never really intended to travel with a sporting team or work just with one team. I sort of liked having seeing lots of different people in different sports. And but yeah, my choice around sports was really because of that focus on biomechanics and making sure you get good understanding of the periphery and muscle function and movement. So I guess that was my choice, why I decided to do the sports.
So this was 1997. Were you also working, I guess you'd transitioned to private practice at this stage?
Yes. So private practice. So I did it was full-time masters at that stage for 1 year. So, and I was the first year of the sports course at UQ. So there was only 3 of us full-time on that course. So it was pretty intense year. I think they threw absolutely everything at us, which was great. And Bill Vicenzino was, had started the program, and he was just an absolutely fantastic mentor and fantastic tutor. We were very lucky to have him as our tutor in our clinic placements as well. And yeah, it was a fantastic year. I learned a lot, so I never regret doing masters or choosing sports.
Yeah, I mean, I guess also you're saying UQ just started their master's program, and it's always nice to stay local, but had you considered traveling interstate to do a master's program elsewhere?
Well, the Musk Masters had been established for quite a while at UQ. It was just the Sports Masters that was new at UQ. And actually, I was in the transition year that some of our friends, actually Queensland friends, had gone to Perth to do their postgrad, because at UQ before my year, you had to have either had honours or you had to do a year master's qualifying. So a year of research before you qualified to go into your coursework masters. And so because of that, a lot of Queenslanders were actually heading to Perth where they could do a grad dip. Where they didn't have to have, that honours or the first year or the master's qual year. But yeah, we were very lucky to be in the first year where they didn't require that. And so we could step straight into a master's degree. So for us, it made more sense to stay local, do masters rather than a grad dip, and, do the master's course of our choice.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice because I did the postgrad MINIPS, and although it's exactly the same course, you come out with a different piece of paper. But then it doesn't matter because you moved on to a PhD, so you surpassed the masters. What happened in the intervening period between doing your masters and I guess almost 10 years later taking on your PhD?
Well, I guess it wasn't quite 10 years later, in that I completed my PhD in 2008, but it took me 7 years.
I bet you I did 9.
Yeah. So the PhD was part-time. And it's interesting, after masters, I said, because it was a very intense year, I loved it, but lots of study and, lots of exam stress. And so I left masters going, loved that year, but hey, I don't think I'll be back to university again.
Exactly
Anyway,
the same.
within a few years, I was back at uni going, no, I really do want to know more. So I've always been a bit of a lifelong learner. And so, so started back, 2001 with my PhD. And I guess that was more just fueled by frustration of not having the answers that I wanted for myself and for my patients. And a lot of these things are often driven by your own problems, aren't they? So I'd had some hip issues and I'd gone to every course and, read everything that was available. And back then there was almost no research on the hip, very little research. Kevin Sims had just finished his PhD. So there was his research, but there wasn't a lot. And so I thought, right, well, I'm just going to have to go back to uni and try to figure it out myself. And so that was the beginning of the PhD journey. But I'd never intended to do that full time because I was after, masters, and, masters really refocused me and re-engaged me with the clinical practice. And I didn't want to, have years of not being in the clinic. So decided to do that part-time. And I had our 3 children during my PhD. So for the first 2, I took a 6-month, break. And when I had the last one, I was too close to the end to worry having a break from the PhD. So, but that's why it ended up 7 years instead of 6 years part-time, I suppose. And then, we also started our business at the end, towards the end of my PhD as well in the last year or two. That was 2005. Yeah. So the last 3 years, we'd sort of started our business as well. So it was a pretty busy time during the PhD.
It was. It was. When you say you're starting your business, that refers to what?
Our own private practice. So after I had our 3rd child, it was, it's just always tricky to, find a work situation that's going to work well with having little kids and having that flexibility. And my husband came up with this amazing idea of converting the downstairs of our house to a clinic. And, now it's quite commonplace, but, back then it wasn't as much. There was a few people doing it, but not as much. And I just thought it was a terrible idea initially. Who's going to have it come to a house to go to a physio? Anyway, he said, if we build it, they will come.
Oh dear.
Anyway,
too many movies.
We converted like the downstairs garage and another room downstairs to clinic, and it started just with me part-time, but it was fantastic at that time because it meant I could, run upstairs and, be with the baby and just, come downstairs when I needed to see patients. And so it was incredibly flexible. It was really good. And there's all that weighing up between, but you're never away from work. And so there's sort of pros and cons. But the flexibility of being so close to work and and being able to just work when you want to and no travel time. And so there's lots of benefits and no overheads and no risks with having to sign up to a lease. And so it ended up very well. And then the clinic ended up taking over. So it's a 2-story house. So we took over another room and another room, and until it was the whole house. And so we did an extension out the back. So we've got 2 big gyms, and then closed the top in and put another big gym. So so then we had to move out.
No room to stay.
No.
Is your husband a physio as well?
No, but he had a background in business management, and so that was the only reason that I was prepared to have our own clinic, was that I didn't have to do the money side of things. Because that was not why I did my degree. And unfortunately back then, and I'm not sure how much, students get now, but we had very little in the way of education on running a business or managing your finances or anything like that. That was the arrangement, that my husband would manage the business and I'd be able to focus on being a physio. So
that's perfect. That's perfect. One in the business and one working on it.
Yeah, that's right.
So coming back to your PhD, what was the official title of your PhD?
Well, my official title ended up being the lateral stability system of the hip. It changed from a lot, I suppose, from when I first, headed into my PhD. I think, like a lot of PhD students, you have these grandiose ideas of being able to answer all these questions. So I had all these questions, and then you realize, actually, I'm going to only be able to maybe answer a very small thing. and actually more of the time that you just propose more questions than answering too many things. So yeah, the initial, I had actually intended to do some EMG work, but initially, there was very little EMG at all that had been done around the hip. And so my original project was going to be doing MRI studies to try to sort of figure out which of the muscles are likely to be most affected. And that would give us a pathway for where we needed to sort of go with EMG. Anyway, the MRI side of things ended up so big, and I ended up being involved with the Berlin bed rest study, which was also MRI. So it ended up being an MRI PhD, and I didn't get to the EMG side of things, but it was lovely to have some ability to be involved in EMG projects through the LEAP trial and through Kim Allison's PhD.
Yeah. So what would you say clinicians could take away from what you learned from your PhD? What would you sort of say that, there's always a lot of other questions that come out of it. What would you say knowledge-wise they could apply in a clinical situation?
I guess from my PhD, that work was, specifically on function of the abductor mechanism. And I think for myself, prior to doing that PhD, I think my knowledge had been fairly simplistic. And I think generally physio prescription of exercise for the hip abductor system had been fairly generic, I suppose. So pretty much every patient would do a clam, do an open chain hip abduction exercise, and maybe do a ITB stretch, and TFL's the enemy, and stretch the ITB. And so that was sort of the general approach to treatment of abductor deficiency. I think within the research that I did in my PhD, I realized, well, there's actually more complexity to understanding the function of the different layers of the abductor mechanism. And I do think that's important, understanding that to some level, because we see so much alteration in how those muscles work within that synergy. So specific areas of atrophy and changes in motor recruitment patterns that, so all muscles are not equal, if you like. And a part of my PhD studies, the Berlin bed rest study, part of it was quite interesting in that we put young, healthy people, or the European Space Agency did put young, healthy people on bed rest for 8 weeks. And my part of that was to have a look at what happened to muscles when you don't load them against gravity. And it was a real eye-opener, because gluteus minimus, our deepest abductor, so it had lost, on average, almost 23% of its muscle size within 2 weeks, which was phenomenal. Whereas muscles like TFL and the upper glute max, which is a superficial abductor, they didn't change their size within 8 weeks of bed rest. So particularly TFL seemed to be very resistant to atrophy in a non-weight bearing environment, but this deeper muscle, this gluteus minimus, was potently affected by lack of weight bearing. And subsequent research, bed rest research, has shown quadratus femoris has quite a similar sort of effect. And in studies of people with pathology, we were seeing similar things, that muscles respond in different ways. So we can't just think that, right, all these muscles are responding in the same way, and we just have to, give them one exercise and it addresses everything. So I think that just made me really aware of, one, the power of weight bearing. So put your foot to the floor and you're much more likely to get some activation in your deep muscles around your hip, and your anti-gravity extensors like your lower glute max and your vasti. They're also really affected by lack of loading. So I guess that's the biggest thing that came out of my PhD research for me, was to be much more specific in the way I assessed and managed abductor deficiency. And then that sort of grew into, I suppose, developing strategies for different conditions in my clinical practice, which then led me to go back to Bill Vicenzino years later, and after my PhD, and saying, hey, I'm seeing so many patients with this lateral hip pain. And I think we really need to be treating them in a much more specific way, because everyone that I'm seeing who's had physio before has been given clams and ITB stretches, and both of those things are really provocative for this condition. So I think there's a better way that we can treat these patients. And I've been, fine tuning my program in clinical practice. So maybe we should have a go at looking at that. And so then that turned into the LEAP project, which was, a fantastic experience.
Okay. And I mean, with all this experience that you've got and training and your PhD, have you thought about going down the specialization route?
So for me at the moment, what I'm looking at is specialization by papers, so monograph rather than by doing the training program.
Yeah. And okay, so with regards to your average day now, are you still involved in research? Are you teaching at UQ? COVID's around, so I guess treating is a bit of a up in the air thing. So what's your average week look like now, Alison?
Yeah, so I do, a variety of things. So it depends on the day of the week, I suppose. So when I do clinic, I'm in clinic for the whole day. So I still run a clinic in Brisbane here. And so that's great. And I've got some great staff. I really enjoy mentoring as well. So some days I'll do a full day of mentoring. So once a month I'll do, every 4 weeks I'll do a full day of mentoring, which is, an hour, one-on-one for each of my staff. And that's really fun because we'll do case study. So we'll, troubleshoot tricky cases, or we'll see a patient together, which is fun, or work on particular skills. And then, we also have a regular in-service that we run, and that's with our whole group. And that's great. Again, I really enjoy that because everyone on my team is, very, very willing and able to contribute ideas. And I think we all get a lot out of brainstorming around different topics or upskilling particular skills. We do a lot of real-time ultrasound. So we've done lots of exploring of different ways that we can use ultrasound, which is fantastic. And we've got lots of other gizmos and gadgets, and I quite like gadgets, but but it's just, I think ultimately we need to go down a pathway where we can be as objective as we can in our measurements. And so where I can, I try to provide access to our staff to equipment that allows us to objectively measure things. And some of those things work really well, and others propose challenges for clinicians in terms of time and things like that. But it's all things that we work through as a team.
Isn't that the challenge? Sorry to break. When you mentioned the ultrasound, we've got a really, really good ultrasound here too. And it's something with my dry needling that I found very interesting, because I've always tried to teach students about 3D anatomy. So like as you go down in depth, what are you actually pushing on? And I've found the ultrasound to be just remarkable for looking at, and example you mentioned glute min being atrophying within 2 weeks to 23%. We use a VMO, and we can sort of say, look, here's your VMO on this side, and just use the calipers and measure the width of it, and then go across the other side and say, look, here's your natural normal side. And patients love it because it's as you say, it's an objective measure they can look at and say, wow, I never realized that I'd lost so much strength. And that's a very powerful motivator for that person to then do the exercise and say, look, I look forward to coming back in a month's time, and we can measure that again and see how it's changed.
Yeah, it is a wonderful tool. I really love ultrasound. And I guess with my area of interest being the hip, there's not really any other way that you can access those deep muscle systems, because you can't palpate the gluteus minimus. You can't put your fingers on that. You can't put your fingers on the iliocapsularis reliably. And so the real-time ultrasound just gives us an amazing window to assess, morphology and function, particularly of those deeper muscles. But as a biofeedback tool, it's absolutely wonderful. And I've done quite a lot of extra, coursework with ultrasonographers on upskilling myself in the use of musculoskeletal ultrasound. And it was an interesting experience. So I did a week-long intensive course on MSK ultrasound, and I was the only physio there. So there were ultrasonographers and one researcher and a sports doc who wanted to do ultrasound-guided injections. But it was so interesting in that we'd look at a structure like a tendon, and I'd immediately go, oh, great. And I'd know exactly what the muscle attaching to that tendon did. And
Yes.
so, it was sort of natural for me to attach that to a function. And then when we were looking at like dynamic impingement of the rotator cuff at the shoulder and the subacromial bursa, it was quite fun, actually, because the sports doc who was on the course, he had quite a thickened bursa and a real impingement and a painful clunk. And we could visualize that. And as he was lifting his arm up, you could see the bursa bunch up, and then it would be this painful clunk and it'd sort of slip underneath the acromion. But then for me, I was going, oh, right, let's see if we can change that. Yeah. And so sort of helped him into a better position of his scapula and gave him a few cues. And then he lifted his arm up, no clunk, and, slid under beautifully, no pain. But do you know what the sports doc said? He said, oh, no, I'm just going to go and have an acromioplasty. And I said, really? I've just shown you that I can take away that pain, and you've seen it take away the impingement. He goes, oh, there is a sports physio down the corridor. No, I think I'll just go and have the acromioplasty. Anyway.
And that just sums up our whole challenge very nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that was a bit challenging. But it's just such a fabulous thing for things like that things that you can make a difference to immediately. And because we already have that functional anatomy knowledge, I think ultrasound is a natural extension for physios. And I think we're probably best placed to use it, certainly in that biofeedback sort of way. So I found it to be fantastic. And my initial experience had been within a clinic I was working with, just doing, trunk imaging. But with my interest in the hip, then I developed, a lot of my own, work and imaging around the hip. And then we've sort of extended further to, all the peripheral joints. And it's very exciting to be able to use the ultrasound to look at the foot intrinsics, because again, they're sort of muscles that you can't really put your fingers on, particularly not if you have them in a standing functional position, but you can see right through the foot with ultrasound. So it's pretty exciting technology, and it's great for biofeedback around the shoulder, and as you say, around the VMO. You can see the popliteus around the back of the knee. So
yes.
Yeah, so there's pretty cool stuff that you can do with the ultrasound.
So you're busy with your research, you're busy with your clinic. What keeps you in a work-life balance?
Yeah, so I guess the other part, of my work is the teaching side of things. So I've got ongoing research that I'm involved with UQ, and some collaborative work with Angie Fearon down in Canberra, and some work in Dublin, which will be kicking off next year, which is exciting as well. But then I've been able to develop a learning platform. That sort of evolved initially from doing practical courses, and then talking too much, I suppose, on the courses, and going, I'm going to perhaps put all the theoretical content online so people can do that first. And so I started online learning a long time ago, well before COVID. And so we've been doing that for at least 10 years now. And then that sort of developed and gradually sort of morphed into a standalone learning platform, which has been fantastic coming into COVID. And now I've been doing more online workshops as well. And at the end of last year, we kicked off Hip Academy, which is more a community of hip lovers, or people who want to be better at treating hips from all over the world. And that's been great because we can have live meetings, and with COVID, it has allowed us to really bring together all these people from all over the world. So that's been fantastic. So I've got all those different aspects. And then just before COVID hit, we did move from more central Brisbane out into suburbia a little bit more, where we have a bit more room, which was actually fantastic to go into lockdown with a little bit of room for our teenage boys. I think they would have gone a bit stir crazy in the smaller house we were in before COVID. But yeah, so now I'm in a really leafy area, and it's actually really lovely to walk around the area. So I do lots of activity in the area. We've got a tennis court here now, so that was fun. So there's always lots happening with the kids at the moment, and just doing some exercise, and we've got a bigger garden now. So I guess it's that's family and other activity, I suppose, keeps me occupied.
Yeah, you're pretty busy. So looking at your physio profession overall, are there 3 particular moments for you that stand out?
I guess in terms of what I feel when I really felt there was key professional achievements, I suppose. So finishing masters, like doing masters, I thought was a really fantastic year, and I think that really re-engaged me, because prior to masters, I think it can be difficult in those first few years. Like, physios are used to being high achieving people, aren't they? And often A-type personalities, and going into something like musculoskeletal physio, where you're not going to be able to actually fix everyone, and when you're developing your skills, there's a fair bit of failure there, and so that can be quite challenging. Of course, you still get people better, and actually it's amazing how many people you do get better when you look back at the things that you did, and maybe that was more about the way we treated them than what we did.
Thank goodness for placebo.
Yeah, that's right. But but masters for me was, right, there must be more. I must be able to do a better job. I must be able to be a better physio. And I really think I was, after I came out of masters, and the years after that, being able to refine those skills that I'd learned in masters. So that was a particular highlight, I suppose, doing that masters. And then handing in the PhD, that was a long slog, those 7 years, and I felt like it was a bit of pushing my wheelbarrow uphill by myself a lot of the time, which is a lot of what the PhD is about. So handing that in was, I almost felt like sparklers or something should go off and confetti should come out of the ceiling, and that was the time where you handed in a physical document. So I handed it in at the office, and it was all a bit of an anticlimax at the time, because I sort of thought, for me, this is this momentous occasion, and it's just sort of a stamp. Thanks, love. Okay. But so that was fantastic, completing that. In the last few years of my PhD, my kids were getting old enough to say, "Come on, Mum, you've just got to finish it." And one of my kids put this sign on my wall that just said, "Just get it done, Mum." So I did finally get it done. So that was a big occasion. And then I guess the third would be being involved in the LEAP trial, and when we finally got our results, our statistical analysis back for the LEAP trial, and showing that we'd had a really positive and significant effect from our education exercise program, which really showed that physio can make a marked impact, and early. You don't have to wait for 12 months to get an effect from physio, which had sort of been the only evidence previously that physio didn't make a difference, or exercise didn't make a difference for 15 months. And so, of course, the docs were going to choose a cortisone. But being able to show that an education and exercise program can actually produce better results, and significantly better results than cortisone, both in the short term and the long term, was really, really very exciting. And so I guess that was my third, most memorable moment.
I mean, they're awesome. They're, as you say, they're quite personal things, and it's, it's not like the world stops for you and you hand your PhD, but I think it certainly should. But if if
Yes,
it
so
did,
do
it'd be
I.
stopping all the time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, like here's a little personal congratulations for that big effort that you put in, because it's a massive thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, if you could look across your spectrum, I guess, as a physio, and you've done a lot of stuff, and as you said, the postgrad masters gave you a learning experience to structure how you were as a physio. But going back to your younger self, are there 3 bits of advice that you would like to have known then that you perhaps now know? Now know?
Sure. And I think continuing on to the point that you made about the masters and how that did make me, change my clinical practice a little bit, or refine my clinical practice, I suppose, was take the time to reflect and plan. And that was the really great thing that we had the opportunity to do on on the master's program, because before that you're working in busy clinical practice, and often it's treating symptomatically because you're just so busy and you're going from one patient to the next patient, and often it's a bit of a band-aid approach and you don't have time to sort of sit and reflect. But during masters, you're made to sit and reflect and figure out exactly what's going on and plan what you're going to do in the intervention. And I just found that to be so valuable that I've, really placed a high value on that ever since in my own clinical practice. I'll always sit down after a new patient and make sure I write a detailed impression about exactly what I was thinking that first time, because and wherever you can, try to have that longer initial assessment so that you can really get to know that patient, listen to them, do a thorough assessment, and really try to get a handle on what's going on and what goals the patient has, what goals you have, and try to write that all down from the beginning, because you'll never really get that time again. Often you don't get that time again to reflect as much, and often you'll never know them as well as you know them on that first day, because you have that time to sort of delve deep into those things. Of course, you get to know people over time, but that initial assessment, I think, or the initial 1 or 2 treatments is very important in making sure you get an idea of what's going on for that patient. And I think taking that time to sit and reflect is really important. And so sometimes that means, trying to ask for, some little gaps during the day so that you've got that time, to reflect. And I think we do a better job if we have that time to have some head space and reflect on what we're doing. So I guess that's my first thing. Perhaps then making sure that we don't take things at face value. Again, sometimes this is just busy, being busy, and we might see something on social media and take that for granted, or we might read an abstract and not really understand what's being done within that research project. Or we might, treat a patient and get a result and go, well, I did this, A plus B equals C, so it must be just because I did that. So again, taking that time to challenge our own clinical biases and challenge, even if it's within yourself. You don't have to be, on social media, challenging people all the time. But I think do your own research and don't just take things on face value, because particularly on social media, you might get comments that are perhaps, based on, a fairly prejudiced view perhaps, and maybe taking one piece of evidence and going, well, this is it. And so I think try to have a broad spectrum of influences so that you can get different opinions from different people, but go and read the papers yourself if you have the opportunity to, so that you can get a good understanding. And then that leads into, I suppose, my third thing, which is never stop learning. You will get more and more reward from your career if you continue to advance your learning. I don't think that's something that I would have had to say to my own self, because I've been a bit of a learner, learning. I think, a lifelong learner, as I said before. So I think take responsibility for your own learning. I interviewed someone recently for a job who was 10 years out and had not done any continuing education in 10 years. And I was quite amazed. And I said, well, why haven't you done any courses or anything? And they said, oh, my employer just never got round to paying for the course on time or something. And I just thought, wow, that's really putting the responsibility for your learning in your employer's hands, where I think, take responsibility, go and pay for your courses. And it is such a good investment in your future and in your own, I guess you'll feel so much better in yourself if you're getting better clinical outcomes and if you're really understanding what you're doing and you're not feeling out of your depth all the time. So there is so much value in doing learning. So I think, don't wait until your employer pays for your education. Of course, if you can, get rebates, you can get rebates on your tax in most situations. And if you can get help, fantastic, but don't let that hold you back. Invest in your learning. Any investment in your learning is an investment in your future. Yeah, so I think that's it.
Oh, look, I'd echo that a million times because, I think a point I hadn't thought about was that you feel much more comfortable in your ability to manage the types of clients that you see. So nobody likes feeling out of depth and treading water. So that point of sitting down and reflecting, like working out where the patient's at and where you're trying to help them get to, I think that's a brilliant point. And then your PD, because for me, I agree with you. It's a lifelong learning that keeps you enthused in your profession. It keeps you moving forward and feeling like you're achieving something and helping people. And you're forever trying to grow that knowledge base so you can help people in many more different ways, because you can't use the same thing with everybody. So logically that leads into the next thing, which is, well, I need to learn more so I can help people in other ways or more people in the same way. So yeah, absolutely. Looking forward, Alison, like, where do you see our profession of physio going in the next 5 or so years? Or where would you like to see it go?
I guess I'd like us to come back to a bit more of an even keel, I suppose. It's important as a profession that we do challenge our beliefs and challenge our practices. And in the last 5 to 10 years, I think as a profession, we have grown a lot in terms of our awareness and understanding of psychosocial contributors. There's also been growth in our exercise prescription. I suppose we've adopted a lot of strength and conditioning principles, which, the evidence suggests we really needed to, make sure we had enough in our exercise programs that we were pushing people towards strength and hypertrophy. And so I think we've picked up from other professions some really important skills. But I have some concerns then that some personalities in our profession perhaps then suggest that we should narrow our focus to almost become psychologists or become strength and conditioning experts, which I don't agree with. I think it's something that as our profession develops, if we add new skills, that's fantastic. And I do think that's part of what makes physios unique is the breadth of our skills. So I don't think that just because we find that something else has merit that we need to throw away, for example, manual therapy, or throw away looking at movement. We don't need to bother about that anymore. I think that, we have so many different presentations that we see within individuals. So you might have 20 people all presenting with the same condition, but having different mechanisms and different impairments, both biological and psychosocial contributors to their condition. And everyone can't be treated in the same way. And so I think the challenge for our profession is not to throw away things that are still useful, but actually to add to our tool bag and bring that together and then try to find ways that we can better match the interventions that we have to the individual in front of us. So I think that's where I'd like to see us go, in the next 5 to 10 years, trying to, get some more, guidelines, I suppose, or some more insights into recognizing what people need earlier, so that they don't have to go through 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different physios or different courses of treatment, because everyone's got different ideas of what they should be applying. I think we all need to have a breadth of skill, but we need to start getting more knowledge of identifying people who need particular interventions as early as possible.
Awesome. That's really good. So I like the idea of staying away from the silo concept and perhaps maybe using the thread of clinical reasoning to bring together an augmented skill set that we have, and we just continue to build on that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alison, thanks so much for joining us today on Physio+10. It's been a real pleasure meeting you and also hearing about your journey as a physiotherapist, and wish you all the well going forward.
Thanks very much. It's been great to be here with you, Doug.